Okay. Patience, patience, patience. Roll catch. Let's go for a Radons. Nice. Bait him into a corner. And the last shot. 3 for 3 hits. Perfect. Hello, it's Cried here, with a Greatbow build and gameplay as a brief preview to my ultimate bow guide. I named this build the Lion's Maw, after Radon, since I think he is the most prominent Greatbow user in the game. Most people probably got screwed over the first time they stepped into his arena. Anyway, to start discussing Greatbows, we must also cover the available Great Arrow options, as the way bow AR is calculated is by adding the Great Arrow's AR to the bow's AR. Your non-weapon art shots are 100% of your total Greatbow plus Great Arrow AR before any damage reduction. I'll go into more details on the arrow in the bow guide, which I will link in the description down below when it's complete. But these arrows are basically not good options, so I'm crossing them out. The bone arrow and its fleshed version, and the regular Great Arrow are simply power creeped. The Golem's magic arrow is actually fairly poor on great bows, as it turns your damage into split damage, so even if it does look like more AR, it actually ends up doing less damage. As for the golden arrow, it's good for PvE. It applies the Ash of War version of Golden Vow on impact to any allies near the impact point. But the problem is, the Ash of War version of Golden Vow is significantly nerfed for PvP. Therefore, this is actually a poor option as well, seeing as it has even lower damage than the magic arrows. Some Greatbow connoisseurs might already be familiar with the Golem's Great Arrow. This arrow not only flies further, so its damage drop-off happens at a longer range, but it also creates an AoE wind effect upon impact. This is important, as you can hit the ground next to the enemy by self-aiming, rather than having to hit the enemy. It allows Greatbows to bypass walking enemies, as shields can easily counter head-on arrow shots. As for the Radon's Spear, this Great Arrow actually flies faster than the other Great Arrows. Furthermore, the Lion Greatbow has a passive effect that boosts the damage of Radon's Spear by 20%. Yes, this is a passive effect that works while the bow is held. You do not have to shoot with it. Therefore, we're going with the Golem Greatbow in our main hand, in order to fire off both our arrows. The Golem's Greatbow has a much higher AR than the Lion Greatbow, allowing us to not lose damage with the Golem Great Arrow, while increasing the damage of Radon's Spear, which can be a deadly mix-up for you, as it is possible to reaction dodge the slower flying Golem's Great Arrow at a distance. While Radon's Spear will sometimes be suffering some damage drop-off at distances we might be firing it off at, we are still usually at a distance where this isn't that big of a deal. Anyway, here is the build. Do keep in mind that bows can only be used two-handed, so the effective strength here is actually 90. I know the soft cap is at 80, but there isn't much to invest in anyway. The setup is simple. I wanted to use Radon fashion, but still achieve 61 poise. The biggest question probably comes down to the talismans, particularly why I'm not running some of them. First, the Arrow's Reach talisman is not very needed. At ranges where you would reliably fire off Golem's arrow, it won't suffer from a damage drop-off due to its further flight distance. As for the Radon Spear, yeah, it does suffer some damage drop-off, but you'll be using the Golem's arrow more. The Radon is more of a mix-up for when you're actually sniping. The hit chance of the Radons is much lower without the AoE of the Golem arrow. If you play this in an invasion though, yeah, I would replace the Crimson Amber with the Arrow's Reach instead. As for the Spear Talisman, this is a decent choice, especially when you get more familiar with the build, as sometimes against aggressive players, which this build struggles most with, you kind of have to trade an attack for an attack sometimes. Since you're doing pure physical piercing damage, you do get the counter hit bonus. However, for the most part, you typically won't hit during the counter frames as a Greatbow, unless you're specifically aiming for a mutual trade. Therefore, the effect of this talisman is minimal. Also, even if you don't run the Spear Talisman, you do still have the 30% counter hit bonus. These are the crystal tiers I'm running, which is why you'll see me light roll sometimes, but I only drink Physic if my opponent does. One quick note before we jump into the battles and commentary. Since Greatbows don't utilize status effects and is very reliant on hitting the correct position with self-aimed shots, it does suffer quite a bit from latency. I'm going to drop 2 instances of funny latency moments as a bonus. If you want to support my channel, please consider buying my fantasy novel, which will also allow you to request a topic of your choice. Greatbows definitely feel different to play, but it is quite a lot of fun once you master it. What the heck is this delay? Especially after that backstab, I don't even know how it got me. I think he went back in time and backstabbed me where I was 5 seconds ago. Okay, that didn't hit? Never mind it. Okay, this is way too lag. Oh, is he trying to jump down? Let's see if we can shoot him. Sorry, dude. Jump drawing your Greatbow helps because part of your draw animation is within your jump animation where you're still moving. So it helps you ready up your bow drawing animation without without the need of completely standing still. Okay, I need to focus. Okay, that's an okay trade to still win this. Just need to read the strafe and AoE. Nice hit. Jumping can actually dodge the golem arrow's AoE, so we have to sort of shoot at the right time. We'll shoot him here, and he's gonna fall to the left. Yep, predicted. And let's try to get him with. Oops. I think. Yeah, I released my Radon Spear too early. Never mind. Okay, let's go for the golem AoE again. And there we go. No dodge, so we hit him with the AoE read. Oh, he wants to buff his shield. Okay. So the golem's arrow AoE, you can just shoot it next to their feet instead of hitting the shield straight on. So all the other great arrows, so normally a shield can just guard against all the other great arrows because you don't have the AoE that can hit people. Okay, Bloodhound's dead. This is gonna be a pain. But if we time... Okay, that was too late. But if we time our shots correctly, we can hit him. Okay, perfect. And we got the counter hit too. Again! There we go. Great. Getting the timing down. I'm just gonna finish him with Fan Dagger. Screw this. I don't want to deal with VHS. Okay, maybe one more bow shot. I can try one more bow shot. But yeah. For those thinking that light roll is super OP, VHS is definitely still more OP. Okay, yeah, never mind. Let's just Fan Daggers. Okay, read where he goes, and Radon Spear. One good point about flying faster with the Radon Spear is you also have a better chance at hitting too. Even just strafing targets is easier because you don't need to read the trajectory as much. Nice. Oh, I think he was guarding. That's why he took a bit less damage. Okay, I didn't time that correctly. Let's see. Dodge. Shoot. There. Oh, I actually hit. Nice. Okay. This setup, Halberd and Offstock is a really strong counter to my current build right now because I only have 61 poise. And Halberd is really fast, so he can just stab me and can't reaction the Offstock. So, okay, not doing great, especially because I'm talking. Okay, this is bad, but yeah, a very aggressive setup like this, I really need the physics drink for light roll, otherwise, you really don't have an answer on a pure Greatbow build. Obviously, you can also use another melee weapon instead of 2 Greatbows. Okay, well played. He put up enough pressure. Oh, okay, this guy's just gonna Elden stars. Oh, this thing really lags my laptop. Ah, pain. Okay, followed by Dragon Breath. We're just gonna keep rolling. Okay, my turn. Okay, that was a poor shot. Let's try again. go. Love the AoE. Okay, he's gonna dodge, so we need to aim Radons. But we're gonna AoE again first with a lot of patience. And yep, since he stopped rolling. And let's try to get him again. Nice. Once more. Okay, yeah, nah. Crossbows and bows are actually a lot faster than greatbows, so they're actually pretty good counters to greatbows because you can stay at a distance where you can reaction roll the greatbow bolts, at least most slower greatbow bolts, so it's actually quite a pain. Okay, let's see. Flick aim. Nice, we did get him. Okay, shoot. Okay, I did not get the... Okay, that was too big of a flick. Let's see. Okay, now let's end it with storm arrows. I wanted the Radon for style points. There we go. Nice AoE finisher. Okay, the shield won't work. You just need to aim well. He's gonna keep shielding. Well, it's not gonna work well for him. And patience. We can just react to his shielding and see what he's gonna try to do, especially because we have the HP advantage. Oh, wrong move, because now we can just hit you since I already charged up my Greatbow. Oh, sorry dude. He gave up. Okay, let's end him with a headshot. Nice hit on the strafe. Man, it feels really good when you do land the Radons, even though it's a lot harder to land the Radons than Golem's Great Arrow. Okay, that was wrong timing, but you can technically hit people when they're recovering, or they're still on recovering frames for the dodge attack. Find some space. I do want to finish him with Radons, but I will settle with Golem arrows if I have to. Oh, I was out of stamina there. Oh my god, reaction time of a snail kite. Careful, and we can trade him, I guess. Oh, okay, I panic roll too much on Greatbows when I don't have a melee option. Darn. Okay, he's dodging the Great Arrows quite well. And how about the AoE trade? There we go. Okay, we'll wait. Nice. Great timing. See, you can catch the rolls. Oh! Jump attacks are actually quite good against Greatbows, especially if I'm charging up the Radon's version and not Golem's version, because I can still technically react and AoE. Nice headshots there. Oh no! Ah, using Greatbows is super punishing because of the long recovery frames. Nice hit. Hitting where he's going. I was late. That was my bad. Okay, we'll just be patient, and we don't have to shoot as long as we have your as long as you have your arrows drawn. It's to your advantage because you can attack anytime. I didn't catch his roll. It's too bad. Okay, flick. Perfect. Okay, jump draw, and oh wait, an out. Oh, I still didn't catch him with the dodge timing. It's okay. We dodged that block proc, and we got to draw again. This time, let's just go for a closer range. Ah, too late. I released too late. Let's go for a stylish finisher. Ah, perfect. Predict his rolls. We will have to play really well against dual Vikes. Again, predicted his roll. Nice. Finally getting some good roll catch timing. Okay, that was my bad. A bad flick. He's not dodging. Nice, perfect. Okay, we're almost done. Maybe I'll even go for Razans because I have high HP. Okay, technically I can just fan dagger him now, but I kind of want to end him with great arrows instead. Okay, what is he doing now? We can just wait. Is he going further and further away? We'll try to shoot him, I guess. Yeah, it's too far for Golem's great arrow. Is he like swapping gear? Okay. Let's see if this hits. Ah, too bad. Oh yeah, we can trade him. Okay, that was really funny. Let's see if this catches. Nice. Okay, again. Ah, he's rolling. Okay, let's swap to golems now. Oh, that was... Yeah, okay, nice. I didn't mean to jump forward. I actually wanted to jump back. Timing. Nice. Perfect. Oh, no. That was too close. I shouldn't have drawn my bow. Okay, that was definitely too close. We have to play well now. Because with RKR, he can just do another jump and we'll be dead. But yeah. Power stance, great spears. That was not far enough for you. We really need to watch out. And don't be too much in a hurry to draw your bow. Sometimes you just have to find the right timing. Shoot. Like that. Okay, let's go for a Razans. See if I can finish him with style. Oh, no. That was not what I wanted to do. So many misplays. Okay. Golems, we'll finish him with AoE. Let's be safe. Oh, damn. Okay, that was a bad flick. Let's go for AoE. Nice catch. Oh, okay, bad aim. You really get punished really hard if you fail to land one of your arrows because your recovery frame is very long. So you have to land. Yes. Okay, we have a chance. Distance for AoE. Oh, is that latency? He didn't take any damage, I think. Oh well. Just have to make it up. Oh, okay. Poor aim. Maybe swap to a golem so we can do the AoE, or maybe we'll done as a finisher. Nice. Well, thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe, and see you next time.